Welcome back to Glass of Water. This is my fourth podcast this season, and I've been trying to focus on learning more about the interview process from the experts. To date, we've learned quite a number of things. We've learned that a top priority for all hiring managers is to provide great coworkers for their existing workers. We've also learned that when you walk away from an interview, it's more important to have left a positive emotional impact on the hiring managers than it is to have laid down a ton of facts. And finally, we've learned that it is super important to demonstrate a growth mindset during that interview. If you are new to the show, I recommend you backtrack a bit and listen to the previous episodes. The content shared by the candidates who have been on the show does not disappoint. The host, well, we won't talk about him. On this episode, I sat down with a gentleman I met recently through social circles, and I can honestly say that he's the type of person who probably doesn't have an enemy. He's everybody's best friend. Jeff Hayes works in human resources in the construction industry for a large industrial company. Most of the time, when I personally think about construction, I'm thinking of Chip and Joanna Gaines on HGTV, don't ask me why, which consequently is nothing like what Mr. Hayes does with Capital Holding Group. From what Jeff shares with us, construction covers a wide swath of professions, from professional tugboat driving, seriously, to building bridges. And it takes people from all walks of life to make such a large company like Capital Holding Group successful. So what are Jeff Hayes' secrets to building a booming, successful organization? Let's listen in and see what we can learn. We are joined by Jeff Hayes. Jeff, thanks for coming in today.
Good to be here.
Jeff is in an industry that I don't really know that much about. And so I'm very interested in the conversation we are going to have today. Jeff, why don't you fill everybody in on, what is your industry and what do you do?
Well, I happen to be in a vertically integrated construction company, but it's a lot more involved than just one facet of the industry. We are very vertically integrated. We have aggregate production and sand production off of the river.
So, okay. Aggregate production. What is aggregate production?
Rocks. So we have rock quarries throughout central Missouri, on into the western side of the state as well, where we produce aggregates or rocks. So that's one facet of the company. Then we have Capital Sand, where we dredge sand out of the Missouri River, something that I think is, or at least to me, it was this unknown thing that I didn't know anything about until I worked for Capital Holding Group. So it's a fantastic operation full of a lot of very passionate people that do a great job at what they do. So we've got the sand, we've got the rocks. That takes us into the other side of Capital Materials, which is asphalt production. So we have 10 asphalt plants throughout the state of Missouri, and they produce asphalt. That leads us into commercial and DOT paving. So we do some commercial paving. It would be your parking lots, maybe even some driveways, things like that, all the way to super paved jobs on the highways throughout the state as well. So
is that DOT, Department of Transportation?
It is. So so that's a lot of what we do is on the paving side is directly linked to all the projects with MoDOT out there on various highways. Everything from I-70 to paved roads and out in the country somewhere. So we do the paving side, and then we also have a heavy civil dirt division that handles a lot of different projects. The largest scope of work that we do is that division, and they do land development. One of the new things that I think we've done here recently is a lot of windmill farms, and so the production of or the development of the land, and then obviously getting that process on the front end for those windmills to be put in place.
So you really span everything, like getting the raw materials to do the work, to create the asphalt, create the pavement that you need to do to actually pave the roads, and then moving the dirt around. It's like all aspects of it.
Correct. Yep. And then, I'd be remiss if I failed to mention our bridge group. So we have a division that does bridge work. And so most recently in the state of Missouri, a lot of people would be familiar with the project we did from Columbia to Jeff City. Jefferson City. And so we did AC exit, that bridge, that AC bridge there, all the way south. We're currently doing a couple of the bridges that people are probably, if they frequent that Highway 63 south of Columbia, I'm sure that they're not pumped about the delay in traffic at times, but it's certainly for a good cause of improving those bridges. So
That's hilarious because one of my engineers here makes that commute every day, and he's had to change his hours of business based on that commute and the work that's being done on those bridges. But he has said he likes them when they're done.
Yes, that's right. And everyone does. That's why we are so passionate and have a lot of great people in those divisions is they have that same passion and they do a great job of creating a quality product.
So what's been your career journey? Were you like, man, I want to go in human resources when you're 8 years old? Are you putting on your human resources cap thinking I can be a human resources guy someday? Or was it a little bit different?
For me, it was more of how can I just be involved with people? It was all about people for me and always has been. I'm an extrovert and certainly enjoy every opportunity to meet new people, learn about their experiences in life. So that naturally took me in my mind, maybe HR, but it also I had this passion for helping people too. And so I felt like maybe a natural way for me to capture all of that would be teaching. And so I did have an education degree. I'll say I never have formally taught a day in my life. I was able to network, I knew some people that in the industry in HR, they had been telling me that I would be a perfect fit for a recruiter role and getting out there and meeting people and hiring them and getting them, tuned into what companies are doing. And so I jumped at that chance and that led me to Panera Bread Company or St. Louis Bread Company. And I spent about 13 years there. And I always tell people that I grew up with Panera because Panera was in this high growth phase of their existence. I started as an entry-level recruiter with the manufacturing side and the bakery operations side, and I grew with that company and ended up in an HR ops support functions position before I departed.
So not necessarily the 8-year-old that knew where he wanted to go, but knew you were a people person.
That's right. That's right.
Stuck with the people industry. That's pretty cool. So obviously, because of the diversity of the type of work that Capital Holding Group does, I imagine you hire people from all facets of life.
Yes, definitely so. And that's the fun part for me. I get to work with kids that are in high school. In fact, we've even met with some schools, 8th graders, and just really nothing more than just educating them on what the field is about. And it's not just about a bulldozer. It's a lot more broad than that. And there's so many different ways that you can go about getting prepared for the industry, whether it's somebody who's set in their ways and extremely driven and wants to be an engineer. And so they go to a 4-year degree and they obtain that degree and they're off and running. But there's also a lot of kids, and this is one passion that our company has, is there's a lot of kids out there that may not be set up for a 4-year college, and that's not maybe the path that they want to take. There is certainly a career for people like that as well, and that's one of the things that we're currently working on promoting more in the Central Missouri area is making sure that they know what that path is and what it could be. And it's entering the workforce right away as a laborer, and you just completely go in at the ground level, pun intended. And work your way into a craft that could take you a lot of different directions. And so that's one avenue. And then there's great organizations or institutions, I should say, like State Tech, who bring these kids out of high school in for a very diverse list of paths that they could take, whether it's fabricating or welding or heavy equipment operations, if they want to be a heavy equipment mechanic, something like that. So we have grown to very much appreciate what they have to offer at State Tech here as well. And that's one area that we have tapped into recently, is just really focusing on educating the youth that there's a lot of different scenarios and there's literally something for everyone. And 4-year degree is important for some, not mandatory for our industry by any means.
So as a people services person, I know you're doing hiring and talking to people from all different walks of life. What are some of the qualities that you look for in those candidates? I mean, whether they're graduating from high school, 2-year degree, 4-year degree, transitioning from one type of industry into your industry, are there certain qualities and characteristics that you look for?
I would say the first part of answering that would be that we are in a pretty high growth mode as a company. We're expanding in many different ways. And one of the themes of our company that you'll hear a lot of people say, including our leader, Eddie Welsh, would be this whole work hard, stay humble. And you'll hear it mentioned throughout our organization, and it's something that I think makes a lot of sense for our industry and the crafts within it. I do think that those are two main components of what we kind of look for in people. We want to definitely work hard, work smart, maybe always challenging the status quo, because in high growth companies, you obviously look for people that are change agents. And I would say that would be the third component, would be focus on embracing change and not being scared of it, because I think that companies that are growing are certainly not afraid to take on that change, however it may come at them.
So could you name, like, what are your top three? Like 3 categories that you want every person to possess that works at your company?
Great work ethic, humble approach, and I'd say that being the change agent for sure. Those are my top 3.
So because you hire individuals from this wide perspective, what are some of the common misconceptions that your candidates come in with, maybe even about your industry, as well as about what you would expect from them during the interview?
I would say that in the interview process, I think the big misconception is that there's a wrong answer to questions. And I say that because I think that a lot of people are always scared and they're overthinking in an interview. They're trying to read you as much as, the interviewer is trying to, read the other person. So I think that a lot of times you'll see people overthinking and really wanting to make sure they're not giving the wrong answer. And anybody who's interviewed with me will know that it's very conversational. It's very much there's really not a wrong answer. It's more of how do your experiences match up with the position that we're hiring for, and what would that look like with that person in the role. And so I think that people that can relax and just talk about their experiences, we get so much more out of an interview that way than if you're very clinical in your approach, I feel like. With regards to the industry, misconceptions within the construction industry, I think it's perceived that from the outside, I guess looking in, is that there's not as many channels within the industry as there are. And I think that there's so much within the construction industry. And even with our company, we've got so much going on. There's just all kinds of avenues. And we may hire somebody and think that they're good for one entity. Maybe they're in the rock quarries. And we find that, man, we should have them out with our, paving crew or whatever the case may be. And so I think that there's so much to offer that it's a journey. It's certainly a marathon, not a sprint when you come into the industry. And I think if you're humble and you come in and you learn the right way from people that have been in the industry for years, that there's so many paths that can be taken.
As you're interviewing those candidates, trying to figure out whether they're humble or figure out if they have a good, strong work ethic, can you think of some responses that a candidate could give you that are a little bit more memorable, that are going to help you be aware that this candidate really has a leg up over the other candidate based on the information that they're providing you?
Things that come to mind that maybe folks that have a leg up. Construction is, there's a lot of attention to detail, and there's a lot of opportunity to be successful, and there's a lot of opportunity there where you could maybe mess up. And so I think that the successful candidates that we see come in are folks that come in and they're not afraid to make a mistake, as long as they're taking that opportunity as a learning experience and applying that to their future performance. I think that's probably one attribute that we've noticed from maybe it's the kids coming out of a trade school, or it's somebody who's been in the industry and started in one area, and maybe we're bringing them into a different facet of the industry. The one thing that is consistent is folks that have had the opportunity to put themselves out there. Certainly, I think have a leg up in the fact that they've learned from some experiences and they're willing to do it again. It's not always going to go perfectly. It doesn't go perfect every day. We tell people often that safety is first and everything else comes after that, because we want to send our people home to their families every day. So,
yeah, I imagine safety is a big component
Yes.
to your industry. What are some red flags that you pick up during an interview? So you're talking to folks and maybe they mention something or do something before, during, maybe even after the interview that you pick up on that you're like, when I see somebody do that, that's usually a bad sign.
The bad experience for me is one of them. The red flag when somebody gets on a tangent about a bad experience with an employee or with an employer, previous employer, or maybe their current employer. That happens frequently. I think we all, if we look back at our first job, mine was in a grocery store in high school, right? So that was maybe my first job I ever had. But everyone can look back on their journey of working and find something that they probably didn't like, or a negative experience. Maybe it was a supervisor that was just very negative, or whatever the case may be. I think it's that experience and what they take from it. It could be made into something that is very much positive in their career and something they learned from. And it's the people that lose sight of that learning within the negative experience, I think, are the red flags for me, because it's not always going to be glitter and rainbows out there on a job site. So to know that those people that may have a bad experience, whatever the case may be, if they can take that and use it as fuel in the future, I think that's the candidate that we want.
Right. So if somebody's complaining basically about their previous job and employer and how terrible it was and XYZ, that's a bit of a red flag.
Sure.
Indicator for what are they going to be like when they're working for me and
Sure,
things don't work
that's
out.
right. And we always tell people too, we love to get feedback from employees. One of the things that we always say is, don't come with a problem, come with a possible solution to that problem. And so that's why we can empower our people to not just throw out the negative things that are happening that they don't like, but how can you think about ways that we can improve that and make it better for everybody? So we do empower our people to think differently like that and to continue to challenge what it is they don't like about their job or about the industry or about the company, and make it better. We look to our own people to get feedback on things like that.
What are some of your go-to interview questions, Jeff? What are those back pocket zingers that you've got that you're like, hey, these are my 3 or 2, or I just asked this one and I can ask this one question and I know exactly whether I can hire this person. Probably not the case, but what are your zingers?
It goes back to how they handle adversity and negative experiences in their past. I know we just spoke about this, but that's a big one for me. I like positivity around me, and we thrive on a positive environment, right? That's where you can be the most productive. And so people that dwell on that stuff, typically I try to get that out of an interview, if that's their style, or if that's they use it as fuel and try to use it to their advantage somehow. So that's one of them. I frequently ask people what gets them out of bed in the morning. And if you think about the current role that we're interviewing for, what about that role would get you out of bed on a Monday morning and get you excited? And so that feedback on questions like that tell me if their heart's in the right place, if it really is a position for them, or is it just another job, And so we want to make sure that we have, I always say, aces in their places. We want to make sure we have somebody set up for success and that can also provide the most benefit to the company as well. And so that's some of the questions I may hone in on in an interview to try and drill down on some of that.
You're trying to find the right candidates and you're looking for certain characteristics in those interviews from those candidates, and you kind of know what are some red flags, things that you don't want to see. Question I'd like to know is, how do you even find those candidates? There's a lot of different tools out there. There's different institutions you can go to. How does Capital Holding Group find their applicants?
It's a great question, and I think it depends on the position. One of the things that I love to talk about is people development. And so I will start with saying that there's no better place to find people than within your organization. And so I look within for certain roles to see how we can continue to grow people and challenge them. Obviously, in a high growth situation like we're in, it is a trick. You've got to really have a balance. I feel like to maintain the culture that you have, you've got to have a balance of internal promotions, maintaining the internal culture that you hold so dear to you, and then mixing in some top talent from out there in the industry. And that's not in our backyard. That's going across the country to find a stellar engineer that's going to come in with some creative ideas and a different way of thinking, whether it's how we bid on projects or how we execute them. So I think it's a good balance. For me, it's all about networking. And I'll tell young students in high school that, get out there and shake a hand and try to learn as much as you can from people that are already in the industry. And chances are you'll turn back to those folks when you're searching for positions, and it'll help you. And I always tell them to just put themselves out there. And it's hard with this generation that lives in their phone. But I go back to just getting out and shaking a hand and having conversation with people that are in the industry. For us, it's finding the passive candidates can be really tough, and it takes a lot of time. And so we are constantly networking on LinkedIn, and we go as far as posting ads, sure, the Indeeds of the world, resume searches, and all those kinds of things. But we have a good blend, and I think you've got to have a balance there when you're attracting talent. You want to make sure that there's a career path for your internal folks and that they feel like there's a next step for them. And you also have to surround them with people that continue to challenge the way they think. And that's where, we go outside and network. I sometimes will get outside firms involved, recruiting firms and things where we need that help as well.
So during your interview, getting back to the interview process, during those interviews when you're talking to your candidates, you said you want it to be more conversational. What kind of responses are you looking for from the candidate? So do you ask very scripted technical questions? Are you more looking for experiential-based offerings from the user saying, hey, I had these type of experiences and I learned these sorts of things in those experiences? What's your approach?
It's definitely the experiences for me. It's very conversational. Like I said, I want to make sure, one, I let the guard down quickly. If that's the only thing I get out of it, I want to make sure that they're comfortable, because if they're not, it's going to be maybe some fake answers, get them out of integrity a bit, and you don't really get to know them the way that you should. And so I really try to, help them understand that this is just a conversation, and not trying to read into it and think that the answer they gave was wrong and it throws them off the rest of the way. Certain things that I look for is a lot of a body language. You look for, how are they sitting? Are they sitting up, and are they, even leaning forward a bit like they really are into this conversation? Or are they slouching in their seat? And it's other things. It's eye contact, not the staring through you, but the natural eye contact. I think is critical. I am old school. I look back at my own experiences, and I had a family member who, every time I saw him, it was my uncle, he would shake my hand and he would look me in the eye and ask me how I was doing. And if my response wasn't the way it needed to be, we would redo it. I look back at that experience, and it was something I'll value forever. And it stuck with me, and it still does to this day, is how did this person that I'm sitting down with just shake my hand? And did they present themselves in a way that exuded some confidence and sincere interest in the interview itself? So.
The old handshake.
The old handshake. That's right.
It's a big deal.
It is a big deal. And I think it's easy. In today's world, you have all these interviews that aren't even done in a venue or a method that you can actually shake a hand. So a lot of it's virtual, right? I mean, so many interviews are done through Skype and FaceTime now and all of those types of things. And so when it's possible, it's still a critical component to how I view someone. So.
Yeah, it shows a level of self-confidence and
Absolutely.
self-awareness, and is that person put together? All of those things can really come out in that first 10 seconds you meet somebody.
Sure.
It's crazy. I could talk to you about some research I've read.
Oh, yeah?
That deals with those first 10 seconds of the interview process. It's phenomenal. So I want to go to a session of my podcast, the advice you'd give. So, Jeff, what advice would you give a high school student who isn't quite sure whether they want to go into a profession or go on to a 4-year degree program?
I would challenge them to think of the reasons for why they would or wouldn't. I think some self-reflection would be a good starting point before they could do the next step. I think they would have to really understand what barriers might be even preventing them from doing one or the other. Secondly, I would challenge them to find people that have done both and maybe seek to understand their path that they took and why they took it. And maybe that helps them find some nuggets of information that could be useful in their thought process or their end result or decision that they make. But I think it goes back to conversations. I feel like at that point it's asking questions to people that have gone one way or the other, why they did it. But you have to understand yourself and truly understand what you're capable of or what's scaring you from doing one or the other to truly be able to come to a conclusion on that, I believe.
All right. Advice number 2, Jeff. What advice would you give to a college student getting ready to apply maybe for a position in your company or maybe it's another company on what they should think about when they're writing their resume?
That's a great question. I think people get too deep sometimes in a resume and they want to they think more is better. I personally, you'll hear anybody in the recruiting field say, they spend seconds on a resume, right? They don't read it all the way through, or at least I don't. Maybe I'm the only one out there, but I can't imagine with the volume that you have to go through to find the people. It's you're hitting the high topics. The high level overview is what you want. So to me, less is more. Getting the important bulleted list of items that they've been involved with, but less is more, I would tell them in the resume writing process. I would say less is more. Don't oversell yourself. I think a lot of times you'll see somebody who looks like they've taken on the world and you dig in deep and they really can't talk to those experiences. It's just kind of listed out. And so I would say be true to yourself. It is a selling point, so you do have to sell and you should stretch yourself. But if you're going to put something down on that piece of paper, expect that I'll ask that question and you be ready to answer it. So that would be my challenge to them.
Okay, number 3, final one. College student getting ready to go in for that interview for the first time. What advice would you give them for an interview?
I would tell them to spend a lot of time reviewing their experiences, their resume, preparing mentally to speak to those experiences in detail. I would challenge them to find others in their life. It could be their mother, it could be their brother, their sister. I think they need to look for people that can just ask them, give me 3 questions that, ask me 3 questions. And there doesn't need to be a filter with that. Just ask any questions about their past or about what they're trying to accomplish, maybe the job they're going after. Because it's amazing. Like, I think you think that recruiters that do it for a living are the only ones that ask good questions. But I think if you just ask anybody to challenge you and to ask a question, it may be something that totally helps you with a important talking point that you could deliver in a interview that can set you up for success. So I would say find people in their surrounding, or if they know somebody in the industry, put the phone down, put the electronics down, and go get in front of people, because that's what the interview will be.
Jeff, thank you so much. I appreciate you taking your time out of your busy day to come in and chat with me for a little bit.
I appreciate this podcast. I got to tell you, when I started listening to it, I think it delivers an important message to a very important audience in the next generation of folks entering the workforce. So I appreciate what you're doing.
Awesome. Hey, thanks for coming in. Appreciate your time, and best of luck to you.
Thank you.
That's it. Thanks for drinking your 4th glass of water. Future episodes are already in the works, and I can't wait to share the content from these A-list individuals. Please take a hot second and like the podcast. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe. Hey, one last thing before you go. Please remember, your professional life is not about what you do. It's about who you are. Hey, real quick, can I get you a glass of water?
Absolutely. I would love one.